Class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Tzarayim Tov, we continue with our class number 47 in Zionism and its relationship to Judaism. And we are talking about the items, the things that were done to transform the makeup of the Jewish people. And the first thing we spoke about was changing Eretz Yisrael into the state of Israel. We're going to now continue with the next point, which is changing lashon hakodesh, the holy tongue, with which God created the world and gave us a Torah. They changed it, the Zionists, to ivrit. Okay, and we have to see why that was so important. Now, first of all, you have to understand that creating ivrit was a very difficult undertaking, but it was absolutely vital for this new Jewish nation. As you see, Zionist writer Yosef Chaim Brenner says why ivrit is so important. In source 3, he says, the Jews are a nation without a language, and what makes the tragedy worse, almost without the need for a language. Now, why would not having a language be considered a tragedy for the Jews? Figure, we went through a lot of tragedies through our history, right? And somehow we survived it. So how is this a worse tragedy? Remember, if Zionism was looking to find a safe haven for the Jews, what did ivrit have to do with it? Will we be any safer if we speak ivrit? Okay, but there must be more to this. So let's let Brenner explain it to you again in another source, and he explains why. Just as language is not a mere garment for poetry, but instead its foundation, its essence, so it is not the national ornament or national heritage for generation, but rather the foundation of all nationalism for all the generations. It is the essence of nationalism. Or, as Eisenstein's Encyclopedia Otzi Yisrael says, it is impossible to be a nation without a specific language. We're on page 65. It's right there. It's right here. It's source right there. Okay? Now, how are we supposed to understand this? First of all, aren't there many countries that in fact do not speak one specific language? Shlomo, how many languages in India? 1,670 languages. Okay, how about Canada? 2 official languages, right? English and French. In Belgium, they speak Dutch, French, and German. Okay, so where did these Zionists get the idea that the Jews had a state? It must have one official language. And even if it were so, why the need to create a new language? What was wrong with Yiddish? A lot of Zionists knew it already. What was wrong with Russian or English? You're forcing an entire population of Jews to learn a language that they never spoke of before. Why was that so important? So remember, we have to go back to the fundamentals of Zionism. That they're trying, it's an unnatural quality that they're trying to push on the Jews as a nation. Remember, it was religion that made the Jewish people the Jewish people. And once you are connected, it doesn't matter what language you're speaking. If there's an organic nature to their nationhood, they all live together in one place. It doesn't really matter what language they're speaking. But the Zionists, they wanted to create a nation out of the Jewish people who had existed all over the world, had a history of having religion and not a nation. So now they're trying to create an identity that overrides the old religious one. And therefore they have to convince the Jewish people that we weren't always what we were supposed to be, because now we're supposed to be Zionists. And if you want to do that, you have to change what the Jewish people used to be. And the greatest way to do that is language, which is so powerful in unifying a nation, if not the most powerful. Now, again, one language is not necessary for a normal nation, but when you're trying to force people to look at themselves as a nation that they never were in such a way to look at, so now you have to have a single unifying factor. And particularly before the state was founded. Ivrit wasn't after the state was founded. Ivrit was before the state was founded. So therefore, the only thing that they could have in common, well, it was religion, but they got to get rid of religion. So what's the tangible sign that we're a Jewish nation if we're not in the homeland of Israel yet? And therefore we have to make a Jewish language. Not even a Zionist language, not an Israeli language, but they're calling it a Jewish language, which is how the Zionists portrayed Ivrit, as it's resurrecting the language of the ancient people. And that's going to be the sign of our coming back to what we always were, never religious people according to them. So we're going to bring back that old language, and that would make all the speakers feel united with each other the same way French speakers feel connected like this. So now we'll look at a few sources over here. From number 6, from a rabbi, de Solapul, rabbi of a Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in New York, wrote in 1914 in a Zionist magazine the following. He says, there's no single agent for holding a people together more potent than that of the possession of a common language, or even that of a similarity of a common language. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark feel themselves to be one kin because of the close relationship of their German dialects. England and the United States, or France and Belgium, or Germany and Austria are natural allies, apart from all the racial, political, and economic considerations, because of their possession of a common language. On the other hand, the greatest spirit between peoples is a dissimilarity of the tongue. A profound truth underlies the biblical story. Look at this. Remember, they don't believe in any of this stuff, right? The biblical story of the Tower of Babel. They all were speaking one language, right? But then people are scattered abroad and divided one from another, not by mountains and rivers, but by tongues and languages. Of these were the isles of the nations divided in the lands, every one after his tongue. That's what the Torah writes. The 70 different nations, the 70 different language. Now, let's see, where do I want to take this next? It's interesting, he uses this idea of the Tower of Babel. Because really, the lesson in the Torah was really the opposite. Okay, the Zohar asks, why did Hashem have to take away the holy language from the generation of the Tower of Babel? Couldn't Hashem have foiled their plans in another way? The Zohar asks this question. Could have done a lot of things. So he answers that the power of the generation of dispersal came because they used lashon hakodesh specifically. Lashon hakodesh is a powerful language. It's the language of creation. And there's all kinds of mystical secrets. If you know how to employ the mystical aspects of the letters, you can, have metaphysical realities here. So the Zohar says, because they were speaking in lashon hakodesh, the language itself helped them. So once Hashem changed the language, their actions had no success. So it comes out, that's what made it all not work. That's why Hashem changed the language, so they could not work together. So now what do you see what's going to happen? They want to bring it back to be able to do things 10 a.m. So the whole point was the Tower of Babel was rebelling against Hashem. So really what's this guy saying? We're going to be pre-Tower of Babel. We'll have the same language destroyed to be able to accomplish what we want. And that's what the Satmar Rav, he quotes this Zohar. And he says, it's the greatest tragedy when evil people speak lashon hakodesh. Because only because of lashon hakodesh were the builders of the tower able to have the whole world rebel against Hashem, which caused such a great punishment to the world. So you see how tragic it is. He's quoting the Tower of Babel, And that kufa was the problem, that they spoke lashon. But it's like in your face. We're going to create the new Tower of Babel, so to speak, and be able to fight against Hashem. Let's continue in what he says. In the past, we Jews have been as little able to build constructively and unitedly as the Babel builders after the confusion of tongues. But in recent years, to a large extent, owing to Zionistic influences, a popular united patriotism is being possible by the revival of our national language. The modern Hebrew movement tends to unite all sections of Jewry throughout the diaspora. In Zionist circles, the Jews of the world are either giving theoretic allegiance to the Hebrew tongue as their national speech, or are striving to make it their own language. Today, after centuries of estrangement brought about by the employment of the multiplicity of Golus languages, the polyglot Jewish people is at length being drawn together in spirit through the medium of the unifying Hebrew tongue. We're beginning to feel with a more vivid sincerity and reality our own kinship with our brethren the world over in the same spirit as the Australian, the Canadian, the South African, the Jamaican, and New Zealander feel themselves to be linked together in union by their common tongue. Perhaps national death and life are in the power of the tongue. Wow, you hear the words he's using? This is exactly what the Chafetz Chaim, the Gemara says, that the power of life and death are in the power of the tongue. And we do it to not speak lashon hara. And he's saying the power of life and death is exactly with their tongue. It's unfortunately, he feels it for the life, but it's unfortunately not that way. So let's summarize here. So why did the Zionists create ivrit? To replace the sole unifying factor of the Jewish people, which was the Torah. And instead, we now have a nationalistic one. Now, we know that kind of unity created by the language is not really unity, because Jewish unity is really based only on love for Jews as co-religionists, as brothers, because we're all children of Hashem. That is real Jewish unity. Unity that's built on a Jewish nationalism, it's not only not Jewish unity, it's a falsification of what Jewishness is. It's a destruction of Avos Yisrael. Because, we love all Jews because we're all citizens of the same country. That has nothing to do with anything. And it's not like you have that tremendous love being felt between different political parties with everyone like you have in that area. So let's take a look now in another historical account of what's going on with the idea of the language, but why it was so important. Source 7, there was an urgent need for the Zionists to develop the language from its role as a sacred tongue into a national tongue, adequate for all cultural needs of a modern nation, along the lines of the European nations. Even the use of the term Hebrew culture underscored the assumption that language is the defining feature of any national culture. It is through language that each nation is distinguished from other nations. In reiterating that the culture of the Jews is defined above all by their national language, Hebrew, the intention was to emphasize the desired congruity between the Jewish people and other normal people of Europe, the English, French, Germans, Poles, Russians, etc. For each of these nations, the name of the nation is the same as that of the nationality, and the name of the national culture is the same as the language. Thus, the aspiration to reconstitute the Jewish people's national existence as a condition of normality was concretely expressed by the use of the ancient national language to refer to the new culture that was being created in the ancestral homeland. From the national standpoint, language and land were the two primary traditional resources used in distinguishing this culture. The return to Hebrew effectively epitomized the process of cultural and national secularization undone by the old-fashioned Judaism. Okay, so what are we seeing? Since the Jews were all spread around the entire world, right, and they didn't really have any shared culture or territory, we had to find a way to unify them all, especially before the creation of the state, because they had nothing. What are you going to hold on to if you don't have a state? How long are you going to wait for a state? So therefore we have to have something else that's the common unifier, and that becomes the official language of the Jewish people. So this whole Zionist theory has to have can only hold on to a theory for so long. So the language, they were teaching us well before the state came into being. So now we have that unifier for them. And you could teach it to anywhere, to any Jew throughout the world. So now every Jew can feel a certain connection. But you got to remember, this language was not a natural language. We could call it a synthetic language of the new Jewish identity. And therefore, according to Professor Eliezer Schweid, he says something very interesting in Source 8. Hebrew is unique that although it is a national language, its name does not reflect the name of the people who speak it. Look at this. Russian is for the Russian nation. English for the English nation. Spanish for the Spanish nation. But instead we have Hebrew for the Israeli or Jewish nation. He says that's unparalleled in the case of any other nation and language. Why was that? So he says, honestly, because the highly abnormal nature of the Jewish nationality and the scale of revolution that was required to gain linguistic normalcy. It was something that was self-imposed beyond that. Right? Because you've got Jews, so we're going to call this Hebrew because there's nothing else to call it. You got to call it Israeli? Well, you don't have Jews in Israel. Jewish nation? What are you going to call it? Jewish language? No. So there's a disconnect. Now, who is the mastermind behind ivrit? Who is, quote unquote, the father of modern ivrit? Was a Zionist by the name of Eliezer ben Yehuda. He died in 1922, so you can see what's going on. This is well in the early 1900s. They're all learning ivrit, right? Yeah?
So what language did you speak earlier?
I'm sorry? Most Jews spoke Yiddish. Or you'd speak the language of the country. Polish, Russian, or sometimes both.
Israel.
What?
In the Israel region.
There was no Israel region. In Palestine?
Yeah.
Yiddish. There was, before this language, Yiddish. Or whatever else they knew, Russian or Polish. They were not no one was speaking Hebrew.
Arabic?
Maybe Arabic, but there was no Hebrew spoken. It was not a spoken language by anybody, by rabbis, religious rabbis. It was Yiddish. We used Hebrew only in terms of our prayers, the davening we did, learning Mishnayos, Talmudic language when it's in Hebrew, but they would be learning in Yiddish. That was the common language. So now you have to make a change for nobody was speaking Hebrew. Ivrit. Okay? So Ben Yehuda, he preached that Ivrit was the main factor that makes the Jews into a nation, even more than national territory. And he says one of the reasons territory is necessary is to facilitate the language. It's not the reverse. Okay? And you see in source number 9, Ben Yehuda says, it is senseless to cry out, let us cherish the Hebrew language lest we perish. The Hebrew language can only live if we revive the nation and return to its fatherland. In this last analysis, this is the only way to achieve our lasting redemption. Short of such a solution, we are lost forever. The Jewish religion will no doubt be able to endure even in alien lands. Religion. But the nation cannot live except on its own soil. Only on this soil can it revive and bear magnificent fruit as in the days of old. Okay, so the question now is, why could the Zionists not explain to the Jews the important nature of Hebrew for the national survival of the people? So why is this? So he explains in the next source. It's plain to see, sir, that our youth are abandoning our language. But why? Because in their eyes this is a dead and useless language. All our efforts to make them appreciate the importance of language to us, the Hebrew, will be to no avail. Only a Hebrew with a Hebrew heart will understand this, and such a man will understand even without our urging. In other words, the only way to get people to believe in the importance of ivrit is to create a Zionist country where the youth can be inculcated with the new identity as a Hebrew, and then they'll understand the value of ivrit, meaning to say only a Hebrew can understand it. Not a Frenchman, not a German. And that's what he means by this Hebrew heart. So you see how this is a 1-2 combination over here. But again, quoting the Satmarav, he points out, he says, the entire purpose of this language, according to all the Zionist parties and organizations, from one end to the other, from left to right, is just one thing. Zionism, meaning nationalism, that through the common language we become a nation, we are considered the Jews in opposition to what the Torah says. So now if you think about this, if you are a religious Jew and you see that they're reviving ivrit, you should be dead against it, shouldn't you? Because it's designed as an instrument to facilitate the shmad of the Jews. That's what it's there for. And Rav David Soloveitchik, Zichron Livracha, son of Brisker Rav, he says this in source 12. And this is the reason that they oppose the language ivrit. Not only in davening and brachas, but even trivial talk in ivrit. Because the inventor of ivrit was a wicked man by the name of Ben Yehuda, who wrote on Shabbos and publicly violated the Shabbos. And also ivrit is the language and symbol of the Zionists, whose entire desire is to uproot the Torah and mitzvahs of the Jewish people. Therefore, this language should be to us, he's using a Talmudic expression, muksa machmas mius, meaning things on Shabbos, you can't touch them because they're repulsive. Let's say garbage. It's muksa because it's repulsive. He says ivrit is repulsive. It's like treif and like pig. And because of the distance that we must keep between us and them, and the hatred that we must have for their ideology, they therefore distance themselves from speaking the language ivrit that these anti-Semites created. Now that was earlier times. I'm not going to get into the present times speaking ivrit, because that's a whole discussion. Because if you're going to want to move to Israel, you're going to have to learn to speak ivrit. So what do you do? Not speak ivrit? But you got to realize in the early, like the 1900s, the Jews who lived in Israel, the Haredim, they absolutely would not speak in ivrit. B'dafka not. And they would tell you not to send your kids to schools that spoke in ivrit. Because they knew what ivrit was about. So again, we can say, so you can say, well, what about now? First of all, the whole idea of ivrit is havara svaradit. There's a whole different thing. People are now doing it in their davening. Now, that's havara svaradit, is not havara ashkenazis. If you're an Ashkenazi Jew, you should daven Ashkenazis, not Sephardi. That's a whole different halachic issues, which I'm not even going to go there. A lot of nice Orthodox Jews who come from Ashkenazic family, all of a sudden they're davening in havara svaradit. That's keneged halacha. If you're a Sephardi, then you say havara svaradit. That's the way you say your Hebrew words for lashon hakodesh. More speaking about holy things. But you got to realize, so now it could be changed. As we'll see when we talk later on about the great struggle that was between the Haredim in the land of Israel and the secular Zionists, what that struggle was. Nowadays, you could say it's a bit different, as we'll see shortly, because the Zionists have already won the contest. That's what Reb Chaim said a long time ago. They've won the contest. So now it's not a question of you not speaking ivrit, you're going to be able to win the contest. If you're going to be in Israel and you don't speak ivrit, no one's going to understand you. So I would say it's like this: is it not fair to speak English? Well, I guess some real Haredim Hasidim people don't speak any English in America. You go to certain areas in upstate New York, all they speak is Yiddish. They don't want to speak English, and more power to them. But unfortunately, many of us speak English, but nobody conveys any holiness to it. And you have to understand, when you're speaking ivrit, nowadays, is you're not conveying any holiness with it, and all the destruction that ivrit brought, it's already done the destruction. So there's a case to be made that is it that bad to speak ivrit now? No, even Haredim who live in Eretz Yisrael are going to speak ivrit. Why? Because how else are you going to get directions? It's like speaking Polish, like speaking Russian. It's like any other language, and there's no holiness to it. That's what you have to understand. Absolutely no holiness to it. It's not the holy tongue. As we will see, it was created to not be a holy tongue. Okay? And more than that, Ben Yehuda wanted to make the Hebrew language compatible with the street language. Remember we said there's no words, Hebrew, lashon hakodesh, Yiddish, Ladino, the languages that the Jews always spoke, don't have certain words like you have in English. There's just no words for those things because they're more of a lower level type of word, more disgusting words. There's no swear words in Hebrew, in lashon hakodesh. There's no F word in lashon hakodesh, Yiddish or Ladino. So, but there's a whole street out there. So he would bastardize the Hebrew language so it would fit into the street language. Okay, and he would add words and change meaning to words. Okay, and all it was to take lashon hakodesh, because everybody knew, lashon kodesh, that's the language of Jewish people. Oh, so now we've got the updated version, which is taking the holy tongue and now using it in places where it shouldn't be used, and using it to go against, just like Eretz Yisrael was called the state of Israel to work against the Jews, so too lashon hakodesh is going to be called ivrit to go against the Jews as well. Now I'm a complete Jew. I live in the state of Israel. I speak ivrit. I know how to swear in Hebrew. I know how to say guttural things in Hebrew. I can modernize things in Hebrew. And only Jews can speak Hebrew because the French aren't speaking Hebrew. And they kind of look at you with disdain if you're in Israel and you don't know how to speak Hebrew. They look at you with disdain, like, what kind of weirdo are you? What kind of Jew are you? You wear a kippah and you can't speak ivrit? And very interesting. So let's continue what this Professor Rapkin has to say in Source 13. In open revolt against Judaism, Ben Yehuda promoted the secularization of the language as a means of creating, quote, the new Hebrew man. Thus the word bitachon, which means trust in God, came to mean military security. Sar habitachon. But that's not bitachon, and that's what they want, bitachon in the Israeli army. You understand? Well, it could be the best word to use, but what are you using it for? When I say the word bitachon, what do I think? What do I always think when I say bitachon? Bitachon in Hashem. Now I have Sara bitachon, which really means put your trust in the security that we can provide you, that anybody could. Even a private security company is still called bitachon. So I trust the private security. In here, we call it security in English, which means to secure. But it's not bitachon. You understand? The shift was far from innocent. The effect was to distance the new Hebrew language from traditional sources, at the same time to approach and win over traditionalist Jews who were drawn by terms familiar to them. This sounds like the Alta Haim. Oh, bituchen, no, bitachon. Okay, we'll change bituchen to bitachon. Same thing. No, it's not. The messianic term, kibbutz galios. What do you think about kibbutz galios? When we talk about it, we say it in the bracha, Mashiach, right? So they took that, which means in gathering the exiles, came to mean in the new context, immigration. That's what kibbutz galios is. It's immigration. Okay, the Mishnaic term of keren kayemes in the Talmud means permanent fund, which meant the accumulation of merits in the world to come. You said every morning in the davening, Elu dvarim shakeren kayemes li'olam haba. You say it every day. These are mitzvah that the Keren Kayemes, the main fund is forever. It's a permanent fund. So now what do they have that? Now it's the Jewish National Fund. Keren Kayemes LiYisrael. How they taking these terms. Another example, the word agadata. When we learn Gemara, there's certain Gemaras called agadata, where they're more stories than halachic. And a lot of them are Kabbalistic. We don't understand the real meaning. So when I hear the word Agada, it's a piece of Talmud written by the great rabbis with great wisdom, great insight. And they either had stories to show, spiritual messages or things like that. What do they use Agada? Which we say is ethical and inspirational. But in modern Hebrew, Agada has taken the meaning of legend, a made-up story. Legends of the Talmud. Legends. It's a legend. Oh, the Talmud's full of legends. Not that it's really true. And finally, we'll leave one last one. One of the most modern words. They had to have a word for electricity. There's no word in the Bible for electricity because there was no electricity. So what does he pick? The word chashmal. Where did chashmal come from? Well, really, it's in a pasuk in Yecheskel, where the Navi says, you don't have the source here, I'm going to tell you. The Navi says, I saw something like chashmal, which looked like fire inside a frame, fire with a glow around it. That's what the Navi sees. This is one of these mystical visions. Now, the exact meaning of chashmal, Rashi says, is sisrei Torah, secrets of the Torah, when Rashi says we're not allowed to delve into them. The Targum says chashmal is something that looks like fire inside it all around, that look like the Shekhinah, which no eye can see and is not possible to observe. The Gemara says that chashmal is a type of malach. There's a disagreement against what kind, but it's something very metaphysical in reality. It's beyond what we can really understand. And the Gemara says really is something we should not be learning. And the Gemara really wanted to consider hiding the book of Yecheskel because it brought out such secrets. But then they say, well, Yecheskel was a great guy, so we're not going to take it out. But one thing's for sure, we don't use that term chashmal in a very cursory way. It was a great prophecy, but we have no idea what it means. It's something beyond. So this Yehuda Leib Gordon decided chashmal should be the word for electricity. Now, why are they picking on that? Well, in the olden days, chashmal was something that was mysterious, unknown. It was the work of the malachim. And now we know, you know what? It's scientific. It explains science. That which is unknown, we now know. And we could talk about it. And there's nothing so esoteric about this. And there's other terms. We'll continue this discussion of the Hebrew language.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.